Do you have an Ender 5 Plus and you're having issues with the power supply? Or maybe you don't trust the no-name one that comes in the printer because it's making weird smells on you. Today I'm going to show you guys how to actually install the MeanWell power supply that we carry for the Ender 5 Plus. If you watch all the way to the end, we actually have some footage where we were testing amp draw and voltage levels on both the stock and the MeanWell power supply. So stay tuned. I'm going to show you guys how to swap this power supply. We have our Ender 5 Plus bottom plate removed. There's 6 screws, 3 across the top, 3 across the bottom, and I have the machine on its side. So if you look here, we have the whole bottom tray removed. So there are 4 screws up top here, 1, 2, 3, 4, that we're going to remove to get the old PSU out of the printer. When you're on the last screw, go ahead and grab the PSU so it doesn't fall out. And gently pull it down. So the next thing we need to do is remove our AC lines and our DC lines. Now, Creality does not follow normal standards for colors, so make sure that you remember which one of these black and reds are the AC and which one are the DC. Now, what I would recommend doing is what we're going to do now is we're going to take these off and put them on the new power supply and then do our low voltage ones. So take a Phillips screwdriver and we're going to take off the red one, which is our line, the black one, which is our neutral, and the yellow, which is our ground, and take those off. And just kind of move this over to the side. And you'll see on the PSU here, we have line, neutral, and ground. So red goes to line, black goes to neutral, yellow goes to ground. You'll probably need to loosen up the screws on the terminal when you get the power supply. Usually MeanWell has these pretty tight on here. So I'm going to put the ground wire on the ground and tighten that down. The red on the line. The black on the neutral. And now if you look on this, we have our V negative, which is these 3, and the V plus, which are these 3. If you look on the existing power supply, we have the V negative and V plus. The reds go to V plus, the blacks go to V negative. So go ahead and take these off. And pull these off the old power supply. So now we have our 3 positives and our 2 negatives on this stock Ender 5 Plus. These need to go to the new power supply. So our first 3 are V positive, our last 3 are V negative, so all the reds go to our V positive. And I'm going to loosen up the 5 terminals we need. So 2 on V negative and 3 on V positive. So I've got my screws loosened up. I'm going to put my red to V plus, my black to V negative, and tighten that down. My other negative to V negative, which is the black wire. And I got 2 more reds to connect now, and these go to V plus. So next thing we need to do is put the little cover, if your PSU came with one. You put the little plastic cover over the terminals here, and it just snaps on like that. And make sure to set your voltage. So you can hear it sets to 230 by default. I'm in the US, so I'm going to switch that to 115. Now we're just going to bolt this in how the factory one was. The only difference with this one is when you put this in, only 2 of these 4 screw holes will actually match up because the spacing's a little bit different. So you can either slide it forward and have the 2 front holes biting in, or you can slide it backwards a little bit and the 2 backs will bite in. So you can see what I'm talking about here. If you do them on the 2 backs, you will still have access to the PSU switch, but if you see here I slide it forward, it's going to block the voltage switch. So I'm going to do the 2 rear screws using the ones that came with the printer. There's one and the other. All I have left to do now is tighten it down. So I'm going to hold this in place and tighten these down. So we have our MeanWell PSU installed from our TS3D shop. We use the 2 screws here to secure it in, and this PSU is not going anywhere even though we're only using 2 screws. So if you secure it with the 2 rear ones right here, you can still have access to the voltage selector. The reason for this is a slightly different spacing on the screw holes versus what MeanWell uses, but the spacing between these two are just fine, and they use the same M4 screws. We got everything all hooked up and the cover on the terminals. So now we're ready to turn it on. So I'm going to turn this on. There we go. This MeanWell power supply fan kicks on when it turns on. So at this point, the PSU installation is done. You can go ahead and put your bottom cover back on. For those of you guys that want to see some testing that we did, you can keep watching this video. I'm going to show the amp draw and voltage levels of the MeanWell power supply versus the stock one. So if that kind of stuff interests you, go ahead and keep watching. Otherwise, just put the cover back on your Ender 5 Plus and you're ready to go. Okay, I have this clamped on here, power's off, zeroed out my meter. So I'm going to go ahead and tell it to preheat to AVS. There we go. And you can see here we're pulling about 6.2 amps out of the wall. So this power supply is actually putting out more wattage than the stock one. Even though the stock one is rated at 500, this is only at 450. This is still able to put out more amps. Now let's see what our bed's reading here. So let me switch to DC here. Okay, so we got this on the bed wire. I'm going to go ahead and tell it to heat. Just kick on in a second here. And we're pulling about 17.6 amps. What you'll see is once it hits temp, it's going to drop into PID mode, and you'll start seeing the voltage or the amperage drop. There we go. So there's our bed at full load there. I'm going to go ahead and get a voltage reading off of the PSU to see what we're sitting at. Let's get a reading to see what we're sitting at on the voltage for the PSU. And we're at 24.27 with the bed off. So let me go ahead and kick the bed on and see what we drop to. So I'm going to set it from 55 to 60 so the bed kicks on. So about 0.1 volt drop, that's not bad at all. So I'm going to go ahead and tell it to cool down the bed so it shuts off. So you guys can see that's a 0.1 voltage drop, and that's taking the reading off of the MOSFET itself. So we are getting some voltage drop from the actual cables themselves. Let me see what we're reading on the PSU terminals themselves instead of off of some wires here. So pretty close. Let me tell the bed to heat. Okay, so I'm getting ready to tell the bed to heat. There we go. So we're not actually seeing any voltage drop. So any that matters, 0.01 at the actual PSU itself. Now if I go and probe off of the points for the MOSFET, you'll see actually going to the bed is reading 24, and then coming into the MOSFET is reading 24.17. So we are getting a 0.17 voltage drop across that MOSFET, which isn't terrible. I think this PSU is going to be a great replacement for this machine. More than enough to drive all this. And it's a MeanWell, not Chai Lang power supply. I'd be really surprised if this actually put out 21 amps. Okay, just for consistency's sake, I just shot a video showing the current draw with the MeanWell power supply that we carry for this model. So I'm going to show you guys the one with the stock. So you can see here I got my current meter on, and I'm going to tell everything to heat. So in a sec you should see that go up once the bed kicks on. And you can see we're drawing about 5.8 amps, 5.9 out of the wall. And I'm also getting a nice odor coming from that power supply, which we did when we built this on stream. So this is pulling less power out of the wall than the MeanWell that we're speccing out, even though the MeanWell is rated at less amps. So let's see how many amps we're actually pulling on the bed, because we were pulling about 17.1 amps with the MeanWell. Let's see what this little guy is putting out. Only 16.8. And I can smell the electronics in this thing getting very hot. And why is that? Well, it's because these Chinese power supplies that are not from reputable companies, they aren't actually going to put out what they advertise. So let me put this into DC mode. And remember, the MeanWell was only showing a 0.01 voltage drop with the bed on. Okay? So we're showing 24.3. And let me turn off the bed. I'm just going to power cycle the whole printer. We're showing 24.25 with the bed off. And I'm going to go ahead and tell it to heat again. And you can see it's actually increasing, which is not good. Let's see where we're getting at. I'm reading the two terminals going out to the bed. We're reading 24.03 and coming in 24.19. So almost the same as the MeanWell, but this power supply is doing something really weird where it's actually increasing the voltage based on the load it's getting. So if I tell this to turn off, let's go ahead and turn that off. You can see it actually dropped back down. So there's something going on in this where as it detects its voltage is sagging, it's artificially increasing it. But we're still getting less amps to the actual bed with this one and less amps coming out of the wall. So this power supply is not as up to the task as a name brand one. That's why I recommend the MeanWells. I just figured I'd throw this in here because I figured people would ask, well, how does the stock one do? It works, but the fact that it smells like burning electronics and that I've seen multiple posts, and this printer's only been out for a couple weeks, in the Facebook groups where these are blowing up, I don't trust this thing. I don't trust these to begin with, but that coupled with the posts we've seen, I'm not comfortable using this on my machine. So I will be installing our MeanWell replacement in here, and this weighs a lot more than this one. Like, this one feels a lot heavier than this, even though this is only technically a 450 watt, and this is rated at 500 watts. I'd be way more comfortable running this harder than running this one because I know MeanWell makes good stuff and this is going to hold up to the abuse. Hope you guys enjoyed this little sidebar on the PSU install video, and I'll talk to you guys again real soon.